Welcome to the lecture series on vitamins and nutrition. Today we are going to look at different aspects of vitamin K deficiency and what kind of role vitamin K has to play in human physiology. So we have seen elaborately on the chemistry of vitamin K, its metabolism, its mechanism of action and various aspects of vitamin K, and we saw how vitamin K gets activated into its enol form and how this enol form contributes in the overall metabolism and how they contribute into the pathways connected with coagulation of blood. So in the previous session we also saw how vitamin K and vitamin K related compounds can be counter interacted. In other words, what all different kinds of antagonists exist that can nullify the mechanism of vitamin K. So saying this, if at all there is any kind of therapy that would directly interfere with the coagulation mechanisms, we can always consider these therapies as something that can be reversed by the treatment of vitamin K. Now we are going to look into different aspects of vitamin K physiology. Suppose if you look at this particular structure, so we saw how vitamin K it's getting processed in our body. So we saw that the synthetic version of vitamin K, what we call it like minadione, is supposed to be one of the very important compound in terms of its activation, although since it's very active it also happens to be little more toxic at higher doses. So now if you look at this picture, this we have seen in the last session, I want to start with this picture so that you can get updated and can have an idea about how vitamin K can exert its effect in human physiology. So you look over here, so I told you in the previous session how a keto form and an enol form can be mutually shuffled by oxidation and reduction reaction. So when the alcohol gets oxidized you get the keto form, and when the keto form gets reduced you get the alcohol form. So if you look at the active version of vitamin K, it's basically the vitamin K in the alcoholic form, or in other words what we call it like enolic form. So you have carboxylase epoxidase, the enzyme which basically catalyzes this mechanism. Now we quickly go into different aspects of vitamin K and how vitamin K basically undergoes catabolic changes and how this catabolic changes basically contribute in the physiology of vitamin K in various biochemical mechanisms happening inside human system. So in the previous session I also mentioned about coumarin type anticoagulants. So we saw coumarin type anticoagulants are basically used in the therapy of clotting or long term management of coronary artery diseases. Now although we do have other better drugs which have been used recently in the therapy, but still coumarin is one of the drugs which is very popular. Still coumarin related prescriptions keep coming, but although it's not so wide as it used to be. But coumarin has its application in other areas as well. So we saw how coumarin fundamentally interferes with the clotting mechanism and how coumarin derivatives are being used as poisons for rodents. So most of the rodenticide available in the market are basically the potent versions of coumarin derivatives. Why we have to look at coumarin derivatives? Because their action is exactly opposite to that of vitamin K. In other words, they like literally act like kind of competitive inhibitors for vitamin K. So if you want to reverse the toxicity of coumarin, giving excess of vitamin K would actually help in reversing the conditions. So if you look at the mechanism in which coumarin getting the effect of coumarin playing a role, you look at this picture, here you have the oxidized vitamin K, and this oxidized vitamin K basically gets reconverted. So there is basically a kind of a cyclic reaction happening. So vitamin K gets activated and it helps in the transfer of reactions, the carbonyl group over there, and this carbonyl group is key in converting the prothrombin inactive form precursor to the active form of prothrombin. So you see over there you have one extra carboxyl group being added over there. So this reaction is essential for the normal pathway to proceed. So, this oxidized vitamin K needs to be regenerated. So, it completes the cycle. So, warfarin basically prevents this particular step. So, it prevents the epoxide derivative of vitamin K, which actually results when it ends up activating the precursor of prothrombin into the active form, and now this has to be replenished. So, this pathway is inhibited by warfarin. So, this is the picture which we have seen earlier, and we saw this is the summary picture, and now we are going to look at vitamin K cycle, what I have told you earlier, how basically the reduction pathway is being utilized as a kind of a cyclic reaction. Now, if you look at the function of vitamin K, we call this reaction as vitamin K dependent glycoproteins. So, wherever in our physiology there is a need for carboxylation reactions, and that is going to involve glycoproteins, in the sense the additional carboxyl groups over there. Okay, so, what we call it as vitamin K dependent reaction. So, vitamin K in principle acts like a cofactor for all these reactions. So, that is a very interesting role of vitamin K, and if you look at different aspects of vitamin K, we saw vitamin K participating in a variety of functions. So, in fact, we have seen how vitamin K playing a role in blood clotting mechanism, and we saw in detail how this basically helps in the activation of variety of clotting proteins, and we also saw how vitamin K plays a major role in vitamin K dependent reactions of other proteins. Although the major contribution of vitamin K is for clotting proteins, we do have other proteins that play a major role. Say for example protein C. In the previous session we saw a glimpse of protein C. So, I will just pick up from there and elaborate more. So, this particular protein, what we call it like, is activated by thrombin in the presence of endothelial cell protein, what we call it like thrombomodulin. So, you see over there this particular protein, it acts in complex with protein S by partially hydrolyzing the activated factors 5 and 8. So, if you recollect, in the clotting mechanism there are different proteins at various stages which gets activated in a sequential manner, or in other words what we call it as the cascade reactions. So, protein C is one of the proteins that helps in the maintenance of this cascade reactions. So, the activated protein C basically regulates the activities of 8A and 5A, and they serve as cofactors for the activation of factor 10. So, in any one stage, if these proteins are not blocked or not getting activated or does not move into the matured structural version as they used to be, then you end up in trouble. Okay, so, this protein, which is a key protein in the activation of 8A and 5A, in turn needs vitamin K. So, now you understand how vitamin K is extremely important, because it is a kind of a chain reaction that vitamin K initiates. So, you see over there, this is one particular, I would call it the activation pathway where protein C is involved. This protein C also has what we call it like anti-inflammatory and anti-apoptotic pathways. So, what you call like anti-inflammatory and anti-apoptotic. So, protein C being activated by vitamin K plays a major role in terms of how cells divide and how cells are restored. See, in any clotting mechanism, always remember there is inflammation, because without inflammation the clotting pathway will not be initiated. So, inflammation is basically a good response of a, shown by our body in terms of crisis. So, when you say there is a tissue damage, a cellular damage happening, then immediately all the immune cells and the cells which are involved in the maintenance pathway, they actually come over there to the site and try to restore the damage caused. So, we have a group of enzymes and proteins which play a role in trying to check this process, because when you consider any kind of inflammatory response, it is something like alerting the immune cells to the site of action or restoration cells to the site of action. But when you do this, sometimes our body cells can overreact, they can produce more inflammatory proteins, and cytokines are excellent mediators. So, these inflammatory proteins, what they do, they create a sustained red alert, and the sustained red alert, it is a kind of an emergency indication for our tissues, and when sustained for a longer period of time can be damaging. So, instead of helping the situation, it could like really create a problem. So, I would say we have curfew, we do have different measures taken by military in terms of crisis, and any kind of curfew or any kind of such kind of military intervention may not be very acceptable for the common public, but eventually if it is going to get prolonged for a longer period of time, certainly it will affect the normal functioning of an average citizen. So, that is the case over here. You can take this as an analogy. So, the normal cell in a body that is destined to do its own metabolic function being overwhelmed by these inflammatory signals, and if this inflammatory signal is going to stay there for a longer period of time, that is going to be like really damaging. So, to avoid all this, our body has a mechanism of anti-inflammatory pathway, and protein C also is one of the proteins that contributes in the anti-inflammatory mechanism. So, this anti-inflammatory mechanism is also wide. So, you see they have one particular role. So, what we call it like apoptotic, anti-apoptotic role. So, what is anti-apoptotic? So, when you say anti-apoptotic, it means every cell is destined to die once it gets aged or probably when it gets severely damaged. Now, when that happens, the cell surface components would indicate the cell that the cell is getting old, and the cell will commit a kind of a silent death and offering all its resources to the neighboring cells, so that it would die without any inflammation. If it is going to die with inflammation, you call it as necrosis. So, we do not want to have that, because it is going to aggravate more of inflammation. So, protein C tries to go and interfere in this apoptotic role, and it tries to help in the healing process. So, any word, whenever you come across this word, even now as we are studying about vitamins, whenever you come across this word anti-inflammatory or anti-apoptotic, always remember it as a healing tone, how the cells or the body or tissue would self heal. So, you see here you find activation of protease activated receptors, what we call it like PAR1, and the inhibition of NF kappa B, nuclear factor of B cells. So, this is one of the important transcription pathways. So, you see here this protein C has a direct link to the immune responses. So, there are problems when people have an inherited deficiency of factor C. What do you mean by that? So, by birth they have a problem of not able to produce sufficient amounts of vitamin C, and this eventually leads to thrombotic risks. So, you see over there protein S is basically one more protein like protein C, and this is not a serine protease zymogen, but you do have this particular protein S playing a very important role in complement pathway. So, you see whenever you look at vitamin K, you have to just recollect back all the pathways connected with immune system and connected with inflammatory systems and connected with thrombolytic mechanisms that has a role to play in inflammation. Vitamin K has a direct say on it. So, you see there is this particular protein, what we call it like C4b binding protein. So, C4b binding protein is basically an output or a protein which results as part of complement system. So, you may be wondering what is this complement system? This is one important pathway of innate immune response, and this particular pathway produces a variety of proteins. So, whenever you have a protein like that ends with B, always consider B refers to binding, okay, A refers to anaphylactic protein. So, it is going to end with A signature like C3A or C4A or C5A. So, the list goes, and you have several proteins in that class, and the same would have a counterpart ending with B, like you say C3B, C4B, C2B or C5B and so on. So, whenever you have a binding protein, it means it is going to get deposited on the corresponding cells, and this deposition would attract more immune cells to the site of action to carry out their role in eliminating the pathogen. Now when this goes out of control, you need to have a mechanism to put them back in place, and C4 binding protein is one such regulatory proteins. So you see there, it is found in the plasma both in free form and as a biomolecular complex with a regulatory component. So you get the point now over here. So protein S is a protein which has a role to play in regulating complement system. See, complement system is a interesting pathway, and this pathway is meant to eliminate any kind of pathogen entry at the very beginning of their entry point. Like it is one of the fundamental innate immune responses that our body produces during invasion by any pathogens, even before the information could be brought further to the attention of higher immune cells, they play a role. So vitamin K's association with protein S has this role of how you end up with, I would say, the pathways connected with the regulation of anti-inflammatory nature. So vitamin K is more or less into initiating the pathway of healing, and also would be there in the support of all the proteins connected in this pathway, where they directly play a role in the healing process. So you see there again, protein S deficiency can actually lead to recurrent thrombosis. Means what? There would be spontaneous clots forming over there. Always consider clotting mechanism, clot formation means there is a safe for inflammation, but this is the interesting part of vitamin K. It directly plays a role in the thrombotic pathway, okay, and it helps in, I would say, initiating the clotting mechanism. At the same time, vitamin K interacts with those proteins which are in need of GLA protein related functional biochemical modifications, and thereby it also tries to counterbalance the mechanism. So that way the function of vitamin K is a kind of a dual role they play in the pathway of clotting, and at the same time they are also there in regulating the pathway so that inflammation does not go overhand. So you see there, so protein Z. So this is also not a serine protease, but this particular protein is actually involved in the inhibition of 10A. Okay, so that this particular protein plays an important role in the pathway. So far we have seen that vitamin K being associated with C, S and Z gives its role in terms of anti-inflammatory mechanisms. So you see there, I have also mentioned purposely in all the slides last line about the inherent deficiency of these fundamental proteins. Like Z deficiency can give rise to bleeding tendencies. Okay, so you see over there all these inherited diseases have inability in effectively utilizing vitamin K. See, you should not get confused with inherited diseases with dietary deficiencies. So dietary deficiencies in people with already such inherited diseases can make them more vulnerable for the symptoms. So that is one of the reasons. See, for example, vitamin K is involved in the activation of these set of proteins, and if you find there is a fundamental deficiency of these in authentic proteins present in the body, then any kind of dietary deficiency of vitamin K can be seen as an aggravated case in such individuals. So we are going to look at some more proteins where vitamin K has a direct role to play. So one is what we call it like osteocalcin. As the name implies, osteo refers to bone and calcin refers to calcium regulation. Then we have the matrix GLA proteins and the protein S. So you see over there is this mechanism of bone mineralization. We have already seen this a little bit, especially when we studied about vitamin D, okay, and vitamin D's role in very closely being I would say helping out with parathormone and how absorption and desorption of bone calcium happens. So bone mineralization is also a very important role, and vitamin K, see, as several studies have shown that serum vitamin K levels or vitamin K intake actually can have an effect on bone density. So, this point has been recently emphasized because our association of vitamin D, calcium and parathormone with bone mineralization is being fairly understood well, but the role of vitamin K in bone mineralization is not been extensively studied, although recently more information is being poured out in basic research, and now we are getting to know the role of vitamin K. So, you look at it, when there is a deficiency, if all the levels of vitamin D and calcium and all the related components are within the range, then we need to look also into the levels of vitamin K. Suppose if there is any deficiency or any inherent pathway involved that can make a body, I would say, deficit for vitamin K, that can be reflected even in the way bone mineralization happens. So, you see that the vitamin K levels and their intake have a direct impact on bone. Suppose if a person is going to have a pathologic fracture, I mean not connected with calcium deficiency, otherwise the person is healthy and there is spontaneous fractures, then the physician would order for vitamin D levels and calcium levels. In addition to that, K levels would also show more information, the way in which bone mineralization happens. So, you see over there atherocalcin. So, what is this atherocalcin? So, whenever you come across this word athero, always remember it is the prefix for plaque formation. Okay, so, atherosclerosis we say, the plaque gets thickened in a blood vessel and that gives rise to narrowing of the blood vessel and blocking of the vessel, eventually leading to embolism. So, the GLA-atherocalcin was discovered in a calcified atherosclerotic tissue. So, atherosclerotic tissue is a metabolically modified tissue surface with more plaque and calcium deposits over there. So, you see there the arterial vitamin K dependent gamma glutamyl carboxylase is found in the walls of arteries but not veins, may be involved in the development of atherosclerosis. So, you get the point. So, vitamin K is actually playing a pathologic role over here, and this is a very interesting find because this particular enzyme which actually involves in the GLA protein formation is more abundant in the walls of arteries. So, they say atherosclerotic tissue formation, vitamin K can actually contribute. So, this might look a kind of a little controversy because so far we have been talking good about vitamin K and their role in anti-inflammatory. Now, here you see whether they really contribute in the atherosclerotic plaque, not always, but we cannot rule out their role. So, vitamin K kind of complications connected with toxicity can be attributed to this. Okay, so, let us say this way, if a person is taking abnormally high doses of vitamin K, what all effects can happen, what all I would say the side effects that you can have. So, this vitamin K atherosclerosis is one such side effect. In a normal case, in a dietary amount of vitamin K consumed, you may not have all this problem, but this could be an issue especially in places where you may have excess amount of vitamin K giving rise to such complications. So, vitamin K dependent GLA proteins play a role in atherogenesis, which involves thrombus induced coagulation as well as intimal classification. So, what is this intimal classification? It is the innermost layer of the vasculature, what we call it like tunica intima, the innermost epithelial layer. Okay, so, this layer getting hardened is not a good thing because this would increase the overall tone of the vessel and thereby can have an impact on the blood pressure. So, you see there matrix GLA protein may be associated in this process and could actually act like a regulator. So, what we are trying to learn over here. So, vitamin K in a normal level is a very good and sufficiently supplied as a dietary source vitamin can be really good, but they can also have this negative side when in excess can contribute to atherosclerosis. So, we should be very careful when we are supplementing someone with vitamin K, and we should ensure that we do not over supplement them, and if they already have a history of coronary artery diseases, supplementing excess of vitamin K can be questionable as far as the benefits are concerned. So, you see over there is one more protein, what we call it like the Gas6, which has homology with protein S we saw, and protein S has an excellent role in terms of, I would say, complement activation pathway, and you see their epidermal growth factor like domain. So, Gas6 lacks thrombin sensitive motifs. So, they are susceptible to thrombin cleavage. So, here you find one more protein which actually has resemblance to protein S. In other words, whenever you study about vitamins and when you delineate a general pathway in which the vitamin has its role to play. Now, if you find homology for any of the interacting partners of the vitamin, and any role or important role that they play in physiology can also be correlated with vitamin K. So, that way this could be an extension of their existing physiologic role, or it could be an implied underlying pathology that could surface up with higher doses of vitamin K. Now, you look at this, how these particular proteins play an important role. So, here we have a pathway, and since they have a epidermal growth factor like domain, so this particular domain is extremely important in terms of their role in activating, I would say, proliferation of cells. So, you see over there they play an important role in that way by initiating the proliferative mechanisms and thereby having an impact on cell proliferation and cell healing process. So, we are going to look at some more aspects of vitamin K, their role in sulfate metabolism and their role in nervous system, and we also have some more components to cover. Probably I would say in the coming session we can actually look into the final role of vitamin K and how vitamin K is extremely essential in eliciting the mechanism known, that's widely known in terms of inflammatory pathway. So, as a quick summary, we can look at vitamin K playing an important role in variety of functions, especially in the inflammatory pathway and in the healing pathway, and also in terms of how vitamin K could contribute in the pathways concerned with self proliferation. So, it is all an extension of vitamin K interacting with essential key metabolic proteins that helps in the mediation of vitamin K's role in helping in the healing process. So, now as a summary, if you look at this, how this particular Gas6 is involved in the phosphorylation and inducing MAP kinase activity. So, you have a tyrosine kinase enzyme playing an essential role, and this particular enzyme which basically function as a ligand for the reception of tyrosine kinase. So, you see there Gas6 and tyrosine kinase are closely related, and this pathway is extremely essential in terms of regulating the protein proliferation. We are going to wind up, and in the coming session we are going to look into little more details of vitamin K metabolism. Thank you.